You're listening to the One Day Advice podcast, where your hosts Nick Riley and Paul Henderson are going to take you for a ride inside the world of personal finance. Together, we're going to give you a fully transparent, behind-the-scenes look into the financial services industry, helping you to optimize your financial life along the way.
So with us today is the host of Savings Circle, a podcast focused on money and the millennial professional. He's an accredited financial counselor who worked in the tech sector before leaving to found the Mountain View, California-based Savings Academy. So Vineet Prasad joins us today to share some insights about how he helps tech professionals take control of their finances and what exactly a financial coach does. So Vineet, before I go much further, can you tell us a bit more about what Savings Academy is, maybe how it came about, who you typically work with, that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that intro, Paul, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, happy to have you.
And so as far as Savings Academy, how it came to be, I, as you mentioned, have a tech background. I worked in most recently before launching Savings Academy full time for Facebook, doing data analytics, product management, that kind of thing. But my real passion for a long time has been personal finance. It's a very strange passion, but I know it's one that you both share. So maybe you don't think I'm as weird as most people.
Not too weird.
But I was very fortunate that my mom, kind of brought me up taught me really well on how to manage money. I came to realize as I got to know a lot of my coworkers in tech that even among those earning a high income, there are some that are, super savers that are saving a lot, some that are, saving enough, and some folks that are really struggling with spending and savings, even having fairly high incomes, but living in the high cost of living cities and are really stressed about finances. So actually organically started for free, for fun, kind of helping people make a budget, figure out their spending and saving and stick to goals, build up emergency funds. And that was really, really fun. I was doing it nights and weekends, just originally for free. And then when I was doing things for free, people didn't take it as seriously. So I eventually started charging for it and saw really awesome results in terms of before and after how much people were spending and savings. I was like, okay, this is really fun. Way more, find this way more rewarding than my day job. So I turned it into a business, Savings Academy, did it as a side hustle for a year and a half while I was working at Facebook. And then eventually got enough traction that I decided to take it full time.
That's great. So do you typically work with tech professionals? Is that kind of your focus? Have you expanded beyond that, or are you focused on that group?
Yeah, great question. I'd say a lot of my clients are tech professionals, like folks that work for Facebook or Google, Lyft, Microsoft, those kind of companies. But I have also worked with folks who are teachers, folks who have lower incomes than typical tech professional. I think just because of my background and my network, like I've ended up working with a lot of tech folks. I know their situation, but and generally young professionals is sort of the like 20s and 30s is like who I've mostly worked with.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about this in the past, and I know Nick and I both really kind of focus on the whys for ourselves, our own business, also for our clients and what they're doing and their goals. And I think that's something that you also look at. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about how you help your clients reframe their goals and how those conversations have looked in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a really big believer in the whys, like starting with those. I think without those, you don't have the motivation to keep going with what you need to do. What I've found is, and this is probably true, just as much, in what you do with the financial planning as what I do in financial coaching, is one of the underlying things that people really struggle with is just like a deep-seated anxiety or stress around not feeling like they're in control of their money, and not kind of knowing where their money goes every month. And so that is often, as I dive into it, like the first time I meet with a client into the whys, that's often one of the real motivators, is to feel in control. And so before we even like look at, money, we kind of explore that and understand how they're feeling around money, which is not something people talk about. People don't talk about money in general, of course, very often, but people really don't talk about how they feel about money. But yet it is such a huge emotional pain for a lot of people. I've heard, clients tell me they actually wake up, stressed thinking about money. I've had clients tell me they feel physically ill about kind of where they are financially, but they don't talk about it with anyone. And so as you just understanding where people are and then understanding the control, like directing money and kind of understanding where things are going is often a good antidote for that.
Do you feel like you started with that approach, or has that developed over, like when you first start talking with friends on the weekend, are you talking about the whys, or have you slowly developed that kind of realization? And I'll piggyback on that and say it's interesting to think about, you're working with people in the tech world who probably have significant incomes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't tend to think about those groups as being stressed about money.
You're 100% correct about that. And to be honest, at the beginning, I thought this was, more of a math problem, more of a, okay, how do we create, knowing that it's also motivational, like how do we create a budget that, or spending plan, as I often like to call it, that people will stick with, figuring out tactics around how to reduce spending, which is really important. And I'm a big believer in kind of behavioral change methods and figuring out what will and won't work. But I think I didn't realize the intensity of those kind of emotions and how motivating it can be to focus on just gaining control for folks. I think like what you said is completely accurate, that most folks wouldn't think that people with high incomes are stressed about going into credit card debt or overspending and things like that. But it is less prevalent among higher income folks. I'd say that the higher percentage of folks are saving regularly than with lower income jobs. But I've now worked with a lot of folks who have north of 100,000, sometimes north of $200,000 incomes, who are in credit card debt, serious credit card debt, and that is always a good symptom, always a symptom that you're struggling from a cash flow perspective.
Yeah, and I think Nick, wouldn't you agree that's something that we see a fair amount? I know I was a little, I wouldn't say surprised, but it's been interesting to me to kind of have some of those conversations with younger clients.
Yes, definitely. And Vineet, you mentioned just the feeling of feeling physically ill from a lot of these money problems too. I think oftentimes people are more comfortable talking to their doctor about health or even their friends about health than they are about their own money. So it's oftentimes something that's swept under the rug or underneath the bed and just left unsaid for a lot of new couples, but also in tech too. To your point, Vineet, it's an industry too that has a pretty varying income base too. So whether you're just starting off or you've got a lot of experience, I think a lot of the tech community is so close. So when they are that close, they see their friends in tech, spending money on a new Tesla and other things. So it almost brings up that overall level of spending to fit the persona that a tech worker has, which I can only imagine brings further complexity into their financial lives.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there, Nick. And I've definitely seen, you're right. The Teslas or the like San Francisco brunches or, whatever it is that kind of keeping up with the Joneses is not just limited to the suburb. It's very much prevalent in the tech world too.
Yeah, millennial brunch is like a whole nother meal. It almost adds another 30% to your restaurant expenses over the course of the year. So yeah.
Exactly.
I'm laughing a little bit. I've had a conversation with a couple Microsoft employees who have said, well, you start and then you have to buy the BMW. And, that's maybe an Audi because, we're close to the mountains, you want to go up to the snow. 15 years later, you buy the Porsche. If you're maybe a little extra successful, there's the Maserati to show that you're different and unique, but there's the defined, and if it kind of holds if you drive through the parking lot, it's a little bit funny.
It's so interesting that you say that, Paul, because I was having a conversation with a client, recently around, they were thinking about getting a car and Porsche and Tesla were the two kind of first names that they threw out there. And, I think that it's valid. But, kind of we talked through the whys, went a little bit deeper, like the second order level. And then we started talking about, the possibility of something like a Honda or Toyota and kind of what the equivalent would be and what the differential there is and what, and we kind of realized what was, driving that decision. And in that person's case, it's not true for everybody, not true for every financial, situation. Honda and Toyota was going to be like perfectly fine for them and work really well, and probably not affect their happiness level too much differently. So
Right. Yeah. The why there is super important, because for some people, they are car people, and that really will bring them happiness, and that's the right choice for them. But yeah, it's just definitely helpful to have that initial, just kind of like tap the brakes and say, is this something that you really want, or is it something that's being influenced by your surroundings? And those are always helpful conversations I have found. So we talked a bit about the why. What comes next in a financial coaching situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized I didn't touch on the like what is financial coaching, kind of
We should
how
do that too. Yeah.
yeah, but then I can talk about what's involved. So what you do, financial planning, the metaphor I like to use is what you do, I see is almost like the primary care physician. Like you kind of touch every aspect of someone's financial life, and you're maybe not like the expert in tax, for example, that might be a CPA, or the expert in estate planning, that might be an attorney, but you kind of touch every aspect of life, and are kind of helping guide strategy and understanding. I see, a financial coach is more like a personal trainer. Like the financial planner will often kind of help people figure out around cash flow specifically, which is kind of the engine that drives finance, especially for young folks. Will kind of a lot of time give direction around cash flow, but oftentimes aren't like week in, week out kind of helping people, keep up with their spending and savings goals. Just like a doctor, primary care physician isn't often week in, week out, helping make sure people exercise and eat well. But that is sort of more the role of the financial coach, where they're really helping you stay on track, staying motivated, being an accountability partner, helping you create and iterate those realistic plans around spending and savings. And it sounds really fundamental. I mean, just like a personal trainer, it's like, well, why would you need that? And for some folks, they don't. They're already saving a lot. They're saving well. Fantastic. I think that's great. And some folks have tried. I've worked with folks who have tried 12 different budgeting apps or tools, and just end up falling off the bandwagon. And kind of when we work together, that accountability partnership and helping them stay on track, help them save thousands of dollars over a period that they weren't saving before. So and so sorry, I can take it one step forward to the process, but was there anything you wanted to jump in there with, Paul?
No, I think that makes sense to me. We definitely, I guess, would say, as generalists, we care about cash flow, like you're saying. We care about savings, but we tend to stick more at the level of, if you're saving a certain amount, we're we're okay. Basically that's good enough for our conversations. It's helpful to know where money is going, just so you can kind of plan out, what a retirement expense is going to look like, or which expenses are going to go away over time. But yeah, we don't necessarily dive deep into the weeds, and that conversation will change slightly based on the different clients. But I think that's a fair generalization. Nick, do you have any thoughts? Or
No, I totally agree. I think there are so many aspects to financial planning, and that's one of the reasons for having this podcast too. We're going to be addressing a lot of different topics. And quite frankly, I think dealing with the millennial, especially tech professional generation, it can be more complex than dealing with a pre-retiree or someone who's already retired. There's a lot of future, I guess, savings goals that come into play that you're having to work backwards towards, and really bring part of that full financial plan. So yeah, I totally agree with where you're going with that, Vineet.
Perfect. No, absolutely. And so to take on the second part of your question quickly, just like what's the first step and kind of what's the process? And the first thing I start with, like we talked about, kind of the whys, the underlying kind of what's really important to you. But then we also then like end up translating that into a prioritized goals kind of list, prioritized and quantified goals. I find that oftentimes, like Nick just alluded to, with the young professionals, they have a lot of goals, and even around cash flow, like paying down debt, building up certain savings, emergency funds, but they kind of have everything in their mind that they want to do, not necessarily, all right, first do this, then do this, then do this, and kind of in a more orderly way. And just kind of creating that organization and structure around goals and planning, I think, is really helpful in prioritization. From there, I look at a balance sheet with folks, help them, untangle and understand where they are in terms of assets and debt. And then we really dive into cash flow by looking at the last couple months of spending. That's often where there's a big delta between what people think that they're spending and kind of what they actually are spending. In the very first session I do with people, like before we even look at their spending, we often start with estimates. And then we look at their spending, and there's often in a couple areas, dining out's one of them. There's often like a 3 or 4x. They thought they're spending $400 a month. They're actually spending like $1,200 a month, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so we look at the actuals. We create a realistic and specific plan around where do you want to be in terms of where do you want your money to be going, and how will you achieve that?
That's one of my follow-up questions actually was, what are those money pits that are out there that you see, or, what type of, are there interesting revelations that come out of those conversations? I think the dining out one that's been eye-opening for a lot of people, particularly right now when most of us have seen our grocery budgets go up and our dining budget drop. So but like a 3 or 4 times multiple is shocking. Anything else that stands out, or anything that's interesting from those conversations?
Yeah, I think that one of the other things, and this is true for most people, there are those sort of what I call planned expenses, although usually they're unplanned. The irregular expenses, the vacations, the income taxes that tech professionals sometimes owe, these lump sums that if you're saving well already and you have a good cash flow, you can just absorb, typically.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have much savings, they often go on a credit card, and so that's how the credit card kind of accumulates. So with those, what I typically recommend is we estimate those on an annualized basis, and then figure out each month what folks should be putting into what I call a revolving savings account. I actually do like to have 2 different savings accounts for folks I work with, especially if they're struggling with cash flow. One is the emergency fund, and that one is really a one-way street. Like money goes in, it doesn't come out unless you lose your job, for the most part, and you need to supplement income for a while. And then the revolving savings account is like, to simplify it, if you're going to owe, let's say around last year, you owed around $6,000 in taxes. You think that'll happen again. And you want to take, let's say throughout the year, $9,000 worth of vacations. Then you put $750 a month in to the revolving for vacations, and you put $500 a month in addition to the revolving savings account for your taxes, and then you pull it out when needed. It's like the reverse credit card, right? I like the distinction that if those 2 are the same for someone who's struggling with cash flow, it's easy for just the emergency fund to go down to 0 as well. So
yeah, I think that's a great point, and I like that way of thinking about it, because that's often a conversation we have is you should have an emergency fund, and exactly where that, like what dollar value we should set that at, it's going to range for the person, but there are moments where you tap into that for something, and that kind of sounds funny when you're talking about your emergency fund. You're like, well, this isn't an emergency. This is just, maybe I want to participate in my ESPP, and this is a way to make the cash flow work. So that's a cool idea to say, let's really have the emergency set to the side, and then another account that we can be a little bit more kind of tactical with in a way.
Exactly. I like that approach too, of just that revolving and then the emergency fund. Do you ever go a bit more granular? I've heard some professionals do like further buckets for travel fund or future car fund. Do you go that granular with some clients, or do you find that added complexity leads to more maybe procrastination or is just more ineffective over time?
That's a great question. I do keep it at one account for like the planned expenses, but one account that I personally use in my own life and a lot of my clients use is Ally Savings. And what they let you do is they let you kind of bucket. So for those clients that want to have some organization, and I'll often, when we meet, kind of help folks bucket within their Ally account what the money is for, knowing that it's fluid, and like, okay, if you end up, if you put some money in there for taxes and then that ends up being more than you thought, maybe your vacation is less, instead of having 7 bank accounts or however many you need. I like that function that Ally has with essentially they have different buckets within one account. But yeah, typically I'll leave it at those two savings accounts.
Is there a different approach that you take with couples versus maybe people who are single who come to you for help with their finances?
Yeah, a great question. So I'd say a couple different, and I'd say about half my clients are couples, half are single. Couple differences. One is for that revolving account. One bucket that I often create is like a his and hers, like big discretionary purchase account, as well as like a corresponding budget in under planned expenses. Because couples often like end up quarreling like several times throughout the month or even week about like, should we buy this? Should we not buy this? One person wants it, one person doesn't. So I like the idea of each, and Stephanie, my wife, and I also have this in our own budget where we each have this like basically discretionary bucket that we budget for and have money go into, and then when we want to make a big purchase, if we have the money in our account, we don't have to talk to the other person about it. We just do it. And then if we don't, then it needs to be a conversation. Where do we pull this money from? Another thing I'd say it's just from what I've seen, the couples I work with, it's super important for both parties to be invested in the process. If the few clients I've had who haven't, seen as big of an improvement in cash flow, it's often that like one person is more invested than the other. It really needs to be a team effort.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the note of having a his/her account or whatever you want to call it, if you don't have that, I feel like couples in general will keep a mental ledger anyways. So they'll be like, well, you bought the brand new pair of shoes. Why can't I have this new purse or whatever it might be? So if it's already going to be mentally accounted for, why not have a separate his/hers? It's designated, it's on paper. But yeah, I think it's definitely more art than science, I feel like, in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all things money. It's partly numbers and partly the psychology. Like, well, a lot of our job is counseling, and I think we've discovered the same thing. If there's a couple or a partnership that you're working with, you need buy-in from both sides. You can't really make a plan if only one person's engaged and you're only getting a part of the picture. So yeah, we always appreciate having everyone who is a party to the plan being in the room and having their voice heard. And sometimes that makes us a mediator, which that's just part of the job. And other times you start with one and then the other person comes in and you realize, oh, this is really we didn't have the full picture. So it's super important that everybody's there.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of commonality between your practice and ours, Vineet, in the sense that you're trying to probe and ask the right questions that they should be thinking about as a couple. I'm sure most of the clients that you work with probably don't spend a Friday night together talking about their personal finances. They don't have money dates. And especially during quarantine or COVID and everything, like you have a lot of time spent with that significant other or your spouse, and how much of that time is actually spent coordinating money for the next month, or you laying out goals for the next year financially. So that's one of the benefits of a financial coach, a financial planner, is asking those questions that should be asked to get that conversation rolling, just to get more clarity in their relationships.
Absolutely. I think that's super important. I've even seen, like, I joke sometimes with clients who are couples who have kids and are super busy. We'll joke like, all right, this is, the once a month that we'll think about finances is when we're meeting with you and it's on the calendar, and that's okay. And sometimes better with couples to like have those conversations, even if there are some quarrels in the meeting. Like, it's better to have those conversations now, like when we're planning for it for the next month, than like when, there's no money left in the checking account, so.
Exactly. And we've had clients come back to us for that meeting, and they're like, you know what, Nick, like we actually had money conversations since we last talked. Like that had never happened before. So it's great to see that evolution happen is where they slowly begin to get on the same page financially and both feel very financially confident.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So kind of talking about that evolution, I guess as your process goes on, you've got your clients to think about the whys of their money. You've got you've gone into the details. You've got them set up with the different accounts that they need. They know their budget. What comes next? Is your goal to launch them and say, okay, you've got the tools that you need now? Do you have people who come back, for check-ins? If we're going to go with the medical terminology, what does that look like for your people?
Yeah, great question. And I do both. I usually start everybody with a one-time kind of like a assessment, like process, a strategy session is what I call it. But then if people, I'll usually make a recommendation, and people you're usually fairly aligned as to whether like the plan is sufficient. And now they have like clarity and an idea of where they want their money to be going, in a system. I usually set them up with a system as well for how to track their finances going forward. But then for a lot of folks, that like having that accountability partnership is really important in terms of staying on track for a goal. And so I do ongoing coaching as well, where I meet with clients monthly, and we actually check in weekly via email. And we share. I use a tool called Tiller Money with most of my clients, which is in Google Sheets. So they can share that with me, and then they share their Tiller with me, and we check in on a weekly basis just to see like how last week was. And again, this cadence I think is good for folks that have challenges around cash flow or struggling around cash flow. Someone's saving 30-40% of their income, or a good amount, as a large amount. They probably don't need to be checking in on their cash flow weekly, but I really like, and it takes 5-10 minutes a week, but people bucket their transactions. I check in with them just around how things are going, usually provide them positive excitement and, positive encouragement. And then we meet monthly around kind of other areas.
Yeah, on that positive and excitement and that kind of emotional side, I wanted to bring up one, it's tangentially related topic. I noticed on your blog you had two posts. One was about a trip you took to Napa, and then another was the importance of cooking as a guy. And I think when we talk about budget, it's so often, it sounds like diet. It sounds like a negative, like you're cutting down on something, like it's no fun, all bad. So I'd be curious just to kind of hear your thoughts on, why were those two blogs important to share on the Savings Academy? I fully agree that they were, but I'd like to hear kind of your thought process on how you approach that type of thing.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think for me, it's because the reason I share those things, when I work with people to help figure out how they'll reduce expenses so that they can get on track for their goals, I try to take the angle of creativity. Like, how do we get creative? Like, how can you find a way to maintain or increase the amount of happiness and joy you get from life and the things you most, enjoy doing, while spending less? Not just as straight up, let's cut this, in half. And I think you have to be really creative about it. And so I like to share ways that my life has been enriched and bettered while I've been able to do things frugally. Like, the Napa trip I shared came in at like $150 per person. And we didn't, do it because we were, necessarily just, we did it because we enjoyed it. We wanted to be frugal, and we had an absolute blast. And I can't imagine it being more fun. Same thing with cooking. Like, for me, that was something I got into for, I just wanted to reduce my dining out spend, but I tried to make it into a hobby as well, like something I enjoy, and figured out ways to make it fun and social sometimes and creative. So there are ways that your life can be enriched while you're also getting on track for your spending goals and decreasing spending.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways to look at it where you can look at if you're cutting back on one specific part of your budget, it could look like a restrictive thing. So you're giving up something, but if that by giving up something that might not be as important to you and your overall happiness, freeing up the capacity to maybe spend on things that you really enjoy. It might be traveling or a trip up to Napa or whatever that might be. Overall brings up your overall happiness. So when looked at it from a positive light, I think that's where budgeting needs a kind of a new focus on kind of empowering the individual to spend in areas that they really find fulfillment in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I love that that's a part of your approach. I think it's super important. And, the more you can encourage people to try new things and to have new experiences and realize that that doesn't mean you have to have the most money to do it. Like you can do it on a budget. You can have fun with that. I'm impressed with the 150 in Napa, because I feel like that, depending on the winery, it might get you a fraction of a bottle. So that's cool to hear, and hopefully inspires some people to try something similar. And I love to cook. I love to eat and wine. So like, to me, anytime you can get people out and doing stuff like that, it's a good thing. So I think we're running a little bit short on time, so maybe we'll close out with just two quick things. One, how can our listeners get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach out? And then second, if you had to sum up, there's one piece of advice to our listeners, and we're going to say millennials working in tech, what would that be? If you had to only pick one.
Perfect. No, happy to. I like restricting the other ones. First of all, if people want to reach out to me, they can check out my website, savingsacademy.com. You can also find me on Instagram or LinkedIn through Savings Academy. I love talking to people about finances. So even if you're just, want to get a perspective on something, or, I'm happy to have a conversation. I really like getting to know people and understanding their financial goals. So feel free to reach out via those methods. As far as one tip, I would say is, if you have ever been stressed about where money is going or anything like that, or saving enough, I would say track your spending. Like know where your money is going in some capacity, and turn that into a rhythm, like a cadence that you're regularly doing. Because just that awareness piece, just the piece of knowing where your money is going, is, I think, half the battle on cash flow. So many people accidentally spend so much money. Like, I've seen people who have $50, $100 worth of subscriptions they didn't know about. Obviously that sounds cliche, but I've seen it many times now. And when, like I said, with the dining out, when people are just shocked at where their money is going, it's not necessarily bringing them a ton of joy. It's just kind of happening accidentally. So just the awareness piece is huge. If you could do one thing, I'd use a tool like a Mint if you want an app, or I really like Tiller because I like spreadsheets, and just make it a habit, a cadence to review it.
Great. That makes sense to me. Well, thanks again, Vineet, for joining us. It was great to hear about what you do and how you do it, and kind of what the lessons you've learned from working with your client base. It's always interesting to hear from the specialists. Like you said, we're generalists. I think we like to have a general pulse of what's going on, but it's always good to see what are the different specialists really diving into.
Thank you so much, Nick and Paul, for having me on. It was great, and I love what you're doing as well.
Hi, I'm Nick Riley, the founder of One Day Advice. If you like what you've heard, we'd greatly appreciate your help in spreading the word. After all, we are financial educators, not marketers. Thanks for listening, and remember to leave us a review.
Nick Riley is the founder of One Day Advice, an independent registered investment advisor. Paul Henderson is the director of financial planning at One Day Advice. Both Nick and Paul serve as wealth advisors to their clients. All opinions expressed by Nick, Paul, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of One Day Advice. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment or financial decisions.